In the name of the warrior, I charge you to be brave. In the name of the Father, I charge you to be just. In the name of the Mother, I charge you to protect the young and innocent.
The Hist are the weirdest thing in all of Elder Scrolls. You might find this statement crazy, since this is the same universe with a time-travelling cyborg, cannibal elves, cat people which include regular house cats that are good at magic, for some reason, literally everything the Dwemer have ever made, and Sheogorath. I don't think I have to elaborate on him, but somehow these trees are weirder, at least in my mind, and that's because they're technically aliens, I think. Alien trees that have a strong association with the Argonians and are apparently capable of some odd yet awesome stuff, and yet I think the Elder Scrolls community has had a tough time figuring out what these things really are, and they're bloody everywhere in Black Marsh, plus in Oblivion, for some reason. So, of all things, why are these trees so confusing, and what do we actually know about them? Well, research for this has made me damn near mad, so let's get into whatever in and out of Oblivion the Hist really are. At least, theoretically.
In Black Marsh, tradition dictates we present a potential mate a unique wedding ring to represent our future bond.
The confusion and mystery of the Hist largely stem from the lack of information around them. There are histories all over the place, but they are most often associated with Black Marsh, and that alone proves to be a major problem when trying to get information. You see, while Black Marsh has been conquered by one empire and joined the other through treaties, we still really don't know what's going on at its heart. The deeper reaches of Black Marsh are extremely deadly to anyone but the Argonians, so it has been impossible to document what's going on in there with all its poisonous plants and crazy predators. Farming doesn't seem to be an option either, since the wildlife is so mental and the climate so tropical that cultivation is a complete no-go, although it does seem like some people have tried. Black Marsh is known for its ridiculous variety of wildlife, and the native Argonians don't really see it as one province like the rest of Tamriel does because of said variety, with these Argonians functioning in many tribes. Now, I like to think of Black Marsh like the Amazon rainforest, except pumped with PEDs and on crack. The deeper you get in, the crazier it gets, and it's to the point where the rest of Tamriel just sort of lets it be in its centre, although the Dunmer of Morrowind have been known to enslave the Argonians it can grab from Black Marsh's borders. Plus, when it was conquered, it's more of a case that the Empire took over the outskirt regions, which was technically enough to loosely bring the province into an empire. But the big thing is, there's nothing really to be gained for non-Argonians by trying to take over the heart of Black Marsh, because they can neither survive nor cultivate anything in there. But this still hasn't prevented all the question marks from popping up. Thus, that leads us to the weirdness that is the Hist. But what are they physically speaking? Well, they're spore trees, sentient spore trees. They're a hive mind, connected at their roots, although some have been known to be isolated, like the one in the city of Lilmoth in Black Marsh, something that we'll bring up later, and it seems that there could be several Hist-like hive minds out there, which we'll also get into later. The Hist, or at least the majority sitting in Black Marsh, sort of function like the aspen forest in Colorado, and I think a bunch more western states. The aspen trees here are all connected together by a complicated root system, like the Hist, and each tree is a clone of one another, meaning that the entire forest is technically one organism. While one organism has created this entire forest, the aspen forest is known as a biodiversity hub, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is what inspired the Hist trees, although the difference with the Hist trees is that they are intelligent and seem to actually want things. What's more interesting about the Hist is that they are likely the oldest living organism in all of Tamriel, older than the humans and older than the elves, although we have a hard time figuring out their origins because of their age and how alien they seem. In fact, they might even be literally alien, as in from another planet and all. It is commonly believed that they have come from a different realm of some kind, and this is something that I talk about in this Sithis video, but I'll quickly go over the possible origin here. In the Anuad, a popular elven creation myth, Anu and Padme, the primordial gods representing light and darkness, were brothers and combined their power to create Nir, the feminized personification of possibility. Anu and Nir fell in love, much to Padme's envy, and when Nir gave birth to creation which led to her death, life sprang on 12 worlds and flourished. Padme, being jealous in the friend zone, hated creation and swung his sword at the 12 worlds, knocking them out of alignment and destroying 10 of them. Anu managed to combine what was left into one world, Nirn, and the 2 surviving worlds brought into Nirn were the worlds of the Elnafey and the Hist. According to the Anuad, or at least the annotated version of the Anuad, the Elnafey were the ancestors of humanity and elvenkind, while the Hist led to the creation of the Argonians. It is curious that elves themselves believed, or at least used to believe, that they were related to humans at some point, and the Argonians are sort of just their own weird alien thing. You might then point at the Khajiit as also being weird alien things, but they apparently descended from the elves, and if you look at most of the Elder Scrolls world, it kinda makes sense. While there is plenty of variation throughout Nirn in terms of cultures and how things work, most of it is somewhat traceable to the real world, and while I have compared Black Marsh to places in our world, it is probably more alien than anything you'd find in even Starfield. This extends to its culture too, and the Hist themselves are at the centre of this alien culture.
Once I was a shadow scale, an assassin in service to the king of Black Marsh, trained by the Dark Brotherhood since the day of my hatching.
The Argonians and Hist have such a strong connection that the Argonians call themselves the People of the Root, in reference to the roots of the Hist trees. The sap from the Hist trees is often consumed in many a ritual, bleeding from the roots that are deep, deep underground, hence the name Deep Sap. The most obvious example of how integrated the two are is what the Argonians of Black Marsh do to their young. Argonian eggs, and yes, Argonians lay eggs, are put in the pool of Hist sap to help with the hatching process. This links the Argonians with the Hist themselves, as their sap is often used to communicate with Argonians, and through this sap they start tripping balls with visions of the Hist's intentions. This link between the eggs and the Hist is so strong that once placed in the sap, if this link is severed, it results in the unborn Argonian's death. As a result, the care of these eggs is of utmost importance to the Argonians, with guardians looking after the eggs known as the Keepers of the Shell. Makes me think of Mario Kart weirdly. Now this does not mean that sap is required for Argonians to be born, but obviously those born out of the sap do not have that strong connection with the Hist and thus cannot hear its whispers, which probably includes most of the Argonians you meet in the Elder Scrolls. Eggs put in Hist sap grow up to be marsh-born Argonians, and these Argonians get a bit of a bonus for having a special connection with the Hist, through magic called, Hist magic. Yeah, not the most creative name here, and like with everything else to do with the Hist, this magic is completely different to the normal kind of spellcasting you get in the rest of Nirn, although I'm not quite sure how, other than that the Hist themselves are the source of this magic. One of the funniest forms of Hist magic came when the Oblivion crisis happened. Now, I have talked before about how every province did during the Oblivion crisis, but this is a fun story and I love telling it every single time. Now yes, this could be propaganda and not true, because I don't think we see any first-hand accounts, but a mixture of how strong Black Marsh was after the crisis and how awesome it is makes me want to believe this actually happened. So, Hist sap is apparently made from the spirit of the Hist itself, and its ingestion also enhances physical prowess to some degree, along with allowing the Hist to communicate with the consumer. Before Oblivion gates began popping up all over Tamriel, and specifically in Black Marsh, The Hist used this communication power to call all Marshborn Argonians back to the province in preparation for its defence. The story goes that the Hist trees allowed Argonian soldiers to enter them, and they acted like the super soldier pod we put Steve Rogers in, creating a bunch of Captain Argonians. These Argonians were enhanced to specifically slay Daedra, and when Mehrunes Dagon's forces began to flood the swamps of Black Marsh, they realised very quickly that this was more than they signed up for. If you combine how deadly the heart of Black Marsh is anyway, with all its poisons that only Argonians are really built for, it should be no surprise that the Argonians had a field day against their foes. Things went so well for them that they pulled an Una reverse card on Dagon and invaded the Deadlands, proving to be so much of a problem that Dagon's lieutenant had to close the portals in Black Marsh just so a bunch of roided up lizards wouldn't keep appearing in Dagon's house. This is probably the most extreme example of what the Hist can do, and shows that one of the greatest powers is communication and the ability to sense a threat. The thing is, we're not really sure how the Hist managed to react to the Oblivion crisis before it happened. It could potentially come from a form of foresight, meaning that the Hist can see into the future, although a tie-in novel, of all things, might point to a different kind of truth. But it also brings up the question of where the Hist actually come from.
A prisoner born on a certain day to uncertain parents was sent under guard without explanation to Morrowind.
So, after Oblivion, Bethesda commissioned 2 tie-in novels to talk about the new dudes in charge of the Empire, the Medes. These books were The Infernal City in 2009 and The Lord of Souls in 2011, showing the early days of the Mede dynasty, and the ancestors of Titus Mede II. These books introduced the island Umbriel, a floating island that had split off from Clavicus Vile's realm, the Field of Regrets, by Umbra, the Sword. Now, weirdly, Umbriel had trees similar to the Hist on it, and a rogue Hist tree, yeah, rogue Hist trees are a thing, in Lilmoth, the same isolated one I mentioned before, summoned the island, communicating with these trees. The island itself started hoovering up souls like crazy, until it was eventually teleported to the realm of the Hist, after its power source got blown up. But this is where things start to get a bit weird if you're looking at the Hist specifically. You see, Umbriel is from Oblivion, with trees similar to the Hist. Now a Hist tree in Tamriel was able to communicate with these trees, summoning Umbriel, and the realm of the Hist is apparently in Oblivion bloody somewhere. This starts getting super confusing because the Hist we have in Tamriel might have come from this realm, which would make these trees of Oblivion. Because they're sentient beings, they might actually be Daedra. Still, most Tamrielic mythologies state that the Hist come from another realm entirely, which we talked about with the Anuad. That same story says that when there was a war between the old Elnafey and the wandering Elnafey, the Hist were largely neutral but ended up getting destroyed anyway as collateral, with most of the realm falling into the sea and the tiny surviving corner becoming Black Marsh. At no point does this mention Oblivion. Could the destroyed section that sank into the sea have gone to Oblivion? Oblivion has been compared to a sea before. I talk about it in a Shea Gorath video, where Jiggalag's conquest of Order, before he's stopped by the other Daedric princes, is described as him going across the seas of Oblivion. Hermaeus Mora also has a section of Apocrypha called the Fathom's Drift, where lost sailors often end up, kind of like Davy Jones's locker, and you access this by sailing the seas, so perhaps sinking into the sea is another way of getting into Oblivion, or perhaps it's even a metaphor for it here. Perhaps this could explain the Oblivion link, but I do feel like I'm reaching for this theory.
Frowning friends, of course. It's genius. Why didn't I think of that?
Now, one thing to note is that while the Hist trees we see in Tamriel are linked by their roots, they can spread through spores, because they are spore trees, at least theoretically. We potentially see this in Skyrim, of all places, with the Sleeping Tree, the one that Isolde is making a drug empire from. She learned to trade from the Khajiit, what did you expect? Now according to Isolde, there are several origins for this tree, but the one we care about is that it's potentially from a spore spat out by the Hist-like trees when Umbriel was floating about. If this is the case, then the Sleeping Tree sap is technically a kind of form of Hist sap, although it doesn't mean you can start hearing the Sleeping Tree talking to you or anything. So there's something different about this tree. There's something off with it. Perhaps there are no visions or anything like that because the tree itself is dormant, although I'm pretty sure the tree is named after the effect that its sap has on people. That's a bit of a mystery, but another thing to note is that the Hist have a connection to the void, and maybe this gives us some answers.
Tell him the words he has been waiting for all these years. Darkness rises when silence dies.
I got quite a bit of flack in my Sithis video for not mentioning how the Argonians openly venerate the guy, and rightfully so. I am known to make the odd blunder, and if I do, let me have it. But the Argonians are pretty chill with Sithis, with his priests once being called the Niswu. At one point, the Niswu were the ruling class of Black Marsh, seeing Sithis as a sort of god of destruction, all Beerus from Dragon Ball Super style, and, like with Beerus, they had to appease him to avoid destruction. The Niswu were later succeeded by the Clutch of Niswu, or simply the Clutch, who see Sithis as a source of change, and this viewpoint more so informs the modern view of Sithis we see with Argonians today. He is the change that produces something new, and teaches the Argonians to be ever-changing, rather than hold on to the past. You can see this in their buildings in Black Marsh, being made from mud and reeds, rather than stone and wood, for these buildings are easily replaced. You can also see this veneration of Sithis in the Shadow Scales, essentially Black Marsh's version of the Morag Tong, an assassination organisation working to bring about change, endorsed by the people of Black Marsh, working in Sithis' will. In a way, I suppose they are more like the Dark Brotherhood in terms of their worship, as they are the most famous worshippers of Sithis, with many Shadow Scales training with the Dark Brotherhood, although many leave the Brotherhood after their training is complete to come back to Black Marsh. This outsourced training is seen as a sort of necessary evil, and many would rather the Shadow Scales not stay there longer than they need to. Now, the organisation has seen a decline which has coincided with the decline of the Dark Brotherhood, which we see in Skyrim, but Sithis' worship still seems pretty common to this day. This could stem from the Hist, who actively see the Void as a place where all routes lead. They claim to rejoin it in the afterlife, according to the interactions we see in ESO, which could explain where the Hist came from to begin with. If they are of the Void, which is basically older than time itself, it could explain why the Hist are seen as the eldest beings in Nirn. Apparently the Hist can even use the Song of Sithis to bring the Voids to take vengeance, which could be what was used to enhance the Argonians against the forces of the Deadlands during the Oblivion crisis. Perhaps the Argonians were Void enhanced in a way, given power by Sithis through the Hist's relationship with the Void. But that leads me to another point. This is all from the viewpoint of the Hist, and don't forget, while these lot are technically trees, they are both sentient and dangerously intelligent, spreading their information across a wide network through their hive mind. Now, I mentioned before that they have wants, but what are those wants? What do the Hist actually want to do?
Oh, for the marshes of home. A small trophy for my young.
The Hist are a bit of an enigma, in that it is impossible to really know their full intent or goal. We know that people communicate with them, but it seems that we, as players, don't get to just sit down and have a long podcast conversation with them. We do know that they will act for the sake of their own survival, as we saw with the Oblivion crisis threatening them and the major enhancement of the Argonians to beat back the demonic horde. While they might not strictly be Hist trees, the trees on Umbriel acted similarly when the device powering the island, a new version of the Igenium, was destroyed. They teleported Umbriel straight to the realm of the Hist to be nestled in the swamp and survive, rather than have the island come crashing down. It should be noted that the Hist do not extend these survival instincts to their subjects, the Argonians. The respect and love the Marshborn Argonians have for the Hist seems to be pretty one-sided from the outside looking in. When Black Marsh was invaded by the Second Cyrodiilic Empire, which I talk about in this Blades video of all things, and when a bunch of Argonians were enslaved by the Dunmer, the Hist didn't really do anything in response. Now, to be fair, these foes were never going to get deep enough into Black Marsh to prove a threat to the Hist and their most devoted, but it seems that the Hist see the Argonians as their ideal tools, rather than their people. It doesn't seem like a similar relationship to what Malakath has with his orcs, for instance, but the Argonians venerate them nonetheless. Because they are trees, they are sort of the environment itself, and perhaps they represent an element of the uncaring nature of Mother Nature. The Hist make up the environment that keeps Marshborn Argonians safe, because it's nigh on impossible for others to make it into Black Marsh's heart. Still, we're in a situation where we're largely on the outside looking in, and a massive reason for this is that non-Argonians don't really have a way to open lines of communication with the Hist, although not for lack of trying. Among the Argonians are sap speakers, specifically of the Maya Dancer tribe. These Argonians are known to drink that Hist sap like it's pims in lemonade at Wimbledon, so much so that they're suffering from the side effects. They get golden tongues, bark skin, where their scales get thicker and darker, and unwanted hallucinations. While the Argonians are the best suited for communicating with the Hist, and are the only ones who can, it shows that even they are not immune to the effects of the Hist, and perhaps the property-changing nature of the sap could explain why the Argonians are like this. Argonians are weirdly quite separate from the other races in Tamriel, and perhaps they weren't naturally made at all, but actually shaped by the Hist over generations. This would explain the kind of black hole we have when we're trying to look at the Argonians' evolutionary tree. At the moment, we can't definitively point to their origin. And of course, this shaping of a race would have been needed, considering that communicating with the Hist as a non-Argonian is a non-starter. We have an example of this when the Blackwood Company, a minor mercenary group operating out of Cyrodiil, smuggled a Hist tree out of Black Marsh in an attempt to extract the sap. When this sap was consumed by non-Argonians, it made them hallucinate and drove them into bloodlust. Although this affected Argonians too because of the way that the tree was treated. This also shows that if the Hist don't want to communicate with you, drinking their sap will not do you any favours, which keeps their potentially nefarious plans to themselves and those that they trust. One of those plans might have been to invade Morrowind after the Oblivion crisis, since the Hist may have been the reason for the Accession War. They are technically capable of this, able to communicate with every single Marshborn Argonian, but I don't think this is the case. The Anzilil, a political party, had taken over Black Marsh after the Oblivion crisis, taking credit for the Argonians' success during said crisis, and after all the years of enslavement by the Dunmer, plus a real chance to expand territory with the weakness of the Empire at the time, it seems driven more by Anzilil ambitions than the Hist's plans. So, I ask myself again, what do the Hist actually want? The problem is I don't have any answers, and given their age, they might sit in an eldritch category where their plans are beyond our understanding. It's the classic Lovecraft way of not having to actually explain anything. It's clear that, at the very least, they wish to endure and survive. If we believe the Anuad, the Hist have witnessed and survived two near extinction level events, one where their world was almost destroyed by Padme, and another where they were almost wiped out as collateral during the El Nefeh War. This could explain why they are so isolated and keep to themselves, despite being able to use the Argonians to make one of the most deadly fighting forces in all of Tamriel and apparently even Oblivion. If we look at the Sleeping Tree as a potential example of how easily the Hist could spread, i.e. just fart out a spore and carry on with their lives, it's almost surprising that spreading further isn't a goal of theirs. We could then assume that the Hist don't want to spread too far out of fear of repeating what has already happened all the way back to the near creation of the world, which they should remember. Now again, I do have to point out that the Sleeping Tree might not represent Tamriel's histories very well. The whole spore spawning thing might be an Umbriel specific thing, and this tree, in its isolation, could be what calls the island back to Nirn, but the histories can survive in a lot of different environments. They have an Oblivion realm, the one that got taken away by the Blackwood Company surviving in Cyrodiil, and the Sleeping Tree in Skyrim. These are all out of Black Marsh, and yet it doesn't seem like the Hist is some spreading virus looking to turn all of Tamriel into Black Marsh and recreate their world when it was one of the 12 before the creation of Nirn. Terraforming doesn't seem to be on the cards here. This could be an explanation as to why the Hist are so passive when it comes to the Argonians getting attacked on Black Marsh borders, because they don't want to leave their little haven they made in the heart of their province. They were neutral during the El Nefeh War after all, showing that they weren't really willing to get into a fight if they could avoid it, but this is also assuming a lot of other things. I am of course assuming that there isn't another Black Marsh-like region with a bunch of histories elsewhere on Nirn. Perhaps one of the other continents has one, or rather had, as some have sunk into the sea. If you want to know more about the rest of Nirn, this video about Nirn's continents is for you. But we're not sure if there is another Hist colony out there somewhere if they can communicate with the Hist in Tamriel. You could maybe assume so, considering that the Histry and Lilmoth could summon Umbriel, but then again there's no way of us knowing for sure. Now that's also assuming that the Hist aren't doing a major waiting game. Remember, they are literally the oldest thing on Nirn. They have seen quite a few races go extinct time and time again. They're older than the dragons, and if the Anuad is to be believed, they're older than pretty much all the Aedra and Daedric princes. Perhaps their plan is to simply secure themselves in Black Marsh, the perfect environment for them to thrive, and wait until the end of a Kalpa, a world cycle, to take over, making the next world one of the Hist again, like when it was among the 12. You might hear this and think this seems like a lot for what are essentially a bunch of trees, but these trees are older than anything else around, and their capabilities haven't fully been explored. They can make Argonian super soldiers, communicate with Marshborn, and amass an army capable of taking on the Daedra themselves. Mehrunes Dagon's forces literally had to give up in Black Marsh because of the Hist. But what makes them so strange is that they have always been there and no one really knows what their deal is. Why do they venerate Sithis? Especially because in his older iteration, as Padme, he knocked the 12 worlds out of balance and nearly destroyed the Hist one. Are they tendrils to the void? Do they seek to feed on the deaths of all mortals as they are sent to the Dreadfather? Did they slowly transform the Argonians into what we see today? A race so different from any other in Tamriel, and if they did, what were the Argonians originally? Did they begin as normal lizards? Now I know it's weird to say that, in a universe as odd as the Elder Scrolls, spore trees are the weirdest of the bunch, but in my mind, they kind of are. They're hiding something. They have to be, and with how old they are, and with all that they have experienced, they have far more answers than anyone else on Nirn. The problem is, they won't share them, not with us non-Marshborn. They were here long before even our gods were, and they'll still be here long after all of us are gone.
What is this piss froth? I need muscle. Will you heed my call to war? Good. Go! Get up!
Thanks for watching my Hist conspiracy theories. There are also theories that the Hist are from another dream, but if you don't understand that, then that's exactly the reason why I didn't bring this up in full force here. I would need to explain things like the Godhead and all the other weird nonsense that comes with. Now I'll do the Godhead in another video at some point, but in the meantime I hope you've enjoyed this Argonian deep dive. I know you Argonian fans don't tend to get too much in, well, anything ever, so I hope you appreciate this one, even if it's me telling you that the Hist are really weird and don't make a lick of sense. I can't believe trees, of all things, are the thing that really stumped me in the Elder Scrolls lore, but it's also because no one in or out of game really speaks a lot about them. Everything we know about the Hist is just strange, able to communicate across planes of existence and enhance Argonians to slay Daedra. Also, they're aliens. Like, of all things that could be aliens in the Elder Scrolls, we get trees. It's mental stuff, but if you enjoyed it, please do the whole YouTube ritual of liking, commenting and subscribing, and hopefully I'll see you in another video later down the line.
But